Welcome to our webinar on complex, unique, and clearly defined business processes. And what we're going to talk about is how do we automate end-to-end business processes with Discovery and Worksoft Analyze. And we find a lot of people have challenges when they're actually documenting their processes themselves. So the agenda is we'll talk about what are the challenges at the enterprise level when you have multiple teams working together. How do we get business involved to help with the documentation? Because many times they're busy doing their day jobs. Then we'll look at what do you do once you've documented them? Can you actually harmonize those processes and get an understanding what your current state is? Or maybe you want to do an upgrade, something like a SuccessFactors or Workday HR transformation. Maybe you're moving to S/4HANA and you've got some business process changes. You need to understand current state versus future state. And then we'll look at how can we collaborate using BPMN exports, move the state into other tools. And then we'll look at the final step. Once we know these processes, how can we actually help our automated testing through generated tests and exporting data itself? So innovation in a fragmented environment. A lot of people are talking about they want to do things faster and more efficient and continuously improve not only the user experience for their internal employees but for their customers. But a problem is people use a lot of different systems, so they may not have a good understanding of how the systems are working together. How the different pieces of software they have, whether they're homegrown, custom applications, or they're integrated into ERP or packaged applications, how do those things work? And a lot of it's because we don't have good process documentation, understanding what the user journey is, walking through those actual applications themselves. Right? So a common challenge is how do we understand what the end-to-end business process is? A lot of people are subject matter experts in a specific part of the process. They may understand how sales orders work or how customer orders come into the system, but they may not be experts in how the warehouse management system allocates inventory or how things are picked, packed, shipped, maybe how the finance department actually does the billing, say the net terms on things like that. So what we find is it's very difficult to monitor this end-to-end user experience and understand what people are doing. We really do need to talk to the business people and have them help us figure this out. And so there's legacy documentation people have. They've done some things to document things with Visio and that. But they tend to be very manual and aren't very accurate. And as processes change, they never tend to update them themselves. So we find this is a really big challenge for our customers. So with the Worksoft platform, one of the tenets or the unique things about Worksoft is we start with the discovery phase. We actually want to discover what your processes are, so how are the humans interacting with the systems themselves, and they can span multiple systems. And that allows us to get a current state. People can use this documentation to maybe build a training manuals, say scope out the effort for an upgrade, or actually just get a topology of the systems themselves. Then, of course, we allow them to leverage that with Certify, do your automation. So whether it's your test automation, maybe it's a one-time transformation of data between systems. We have our deployment methodologies with Execution Manager, which lets us run these tests from, say, your Jenkins pipeline on physical or virtual machines. Maybe you do this as part of your ADO. Sometimes it's just, the catch-all of lights out testing itself. And then in the end, we want to actually look at what we can do for reporting on that. So the unique thing is we'll start with some very verbose graphical reports on the front end explaining the business process. And then if you take this through the end to automation, you can actually see lots of audit reports and different types of reports on the back end also. So when I say that our systems are complex, it is literally, these systems that people are working with, the subject matter experts may be understanding of how, say, a website or orders come in off mobile devices. And then they have to go to the sales order systems and look at maybe Fiori and UI5 and SAP systems. They may have SuccessFactors or Reba, Hybris, Concur, different types of custom package applications that are built in browsers. Sometimes they have custom apps written in Java and .NET. They have Microsoft Offices and all the way down to the mainframe. So what we find is understanding what the actual flow of a transaction is very difficult. A lot of people don't have the fidelity or the understanding of what data did they enter? How did they do that? What was the handshake between things? And what we find is if we ask for people to do this manually, they kind of skip things that they do rote. They may not know all the processes, because quite honestly, from an order to working through supply chain, manufacturing, delivery, and billing, it's a lot of different systems, and that's not a single role that someone has in the organization. So the goal is we want to be able to document this process across the applications and then generate that documentation. And then a side effect is we can actually use that for automation once we've documented it. So why is it so hard to actually do this documentation? Well, it's complex. The processes span multiple applications. You may not be the subject matter expert in everything. In many cases, these processes are very UI-driven, and they work across multiple desktops. And so people don't understand the processes people do or the applications they use on their different desktops themselves. And it just comes down to a lot of cross-team collaboration to get the bigger picture and understand what's going on. And the other thing is, if you talk to business who actually understand how these things work, they don't have time to document these things. It's just not something they're concerned with in their daily jobs. They don't have time to do that every day. And when they change, they certainly don't have time to keep updating that documentation manually. So how do we actually do this? What we want to do is we want to include business into our process discovery. So we want to actually have the business people help us out and document these processes. So what we say is, please, let's have you do your normal daily job. We'll activate capture. We'll capture what's going on. And this will give us high-fidelity windows and screenshots of all the objects and everything you're interacting with. They can include documentation and comments on that, or validations, what they would look for success or failure. And then what happens is they load that into Analyze, and then we create really high-fidelity documentation for them. So it's very simple, and the idea is how can we make it easy for business to participate without going to the classic whiteboard, describing, and then if they have to take notes and screenshots and snag it, that takes a lot of time. It's just not a good use of their time or yours. So what does this actually look like? So I'm going to come over into my S4 system. I'm going to activate capture. And so basically the business person can run this where they're watching it, or they can hide it down. But I found a lot of times people actually want to understand what's going on, so they actually do this from their actual the visual part of the screen. They want to see this happening itself. Okay? So I come into my sales order tiles, and what we'll see is as I interact with the system, it's actually going to document on the right panel. Okay? So I'm going to the create sales order system, and then I can actually go through, and I'm going to click the execute to skip this page. And what I see on the right is that identified I was on the home page. I actually had it actually detected I went to the second page, and I clicked the tile. You'll see as I'm working, this starts, interaction is in real time. So as I type things and enter, they show up into the system. And what's happening is it's capturing the data, the screenshots, and everything that's happening for me. So I'm going to pause here, and I'll show you. The business person, if they ever have a question what's happening, they can actually come over here, and they can see, oh, yep, it did see that I entered the distribution channel and the data here. It saw the data I'm interacting with. So there's no mystery. So it's not something they should be worried or scared about, because it's actually showing them as it does it. Now, if they want to, they can just minimize this window and do the whole thing. But I find a lot of times people, they want to see what's happening, right? So I'll come into the system, it's going to enter the rest of my data. Okay, I'll enter my data, and I'll click Save. And then from a documentation perspective, if I'm trying to do this maybe to help other people understand what's happening, maybe I want to put a comment. Created order for bike. Keep the order number for the delivery. This should be an example of in stock, right? So I can put comments of what's happening. I can actually use this this touch button here, and I can say, here is the actual order number, and so we'll document that so it's within the system itself. So the idea is the users keep walking through the system and do their daily job. So I can actually go to more steps here, or I can actually upload this into Analyze itself. So the idea is just, happy path. This is happy path order. I'll save to Analyze. And we'll see the capture has been uploaded, and then I'll come over here into Analyze. And I'll log in. And so at this point, I'm going to start watching for the process. Okay, it's already shown up. So here we go. This is the order I just did. And what I can see is here's the activity flow. So the activities that we saw here, these blue areas of how I navigated across the application, they show up as my activity flow, and then the actual steps show up also. So the idea is I actually can get some very rich documentation of what's happening. Okay. So this workflow was specifically built with the business users in mind. We made the landing page of Analyze basically show you your last 30 minutes of work. You can actually just see your work. So you have multiple teams working together, makes it easy for them to find, and we'll see the documentation being generated, right? You can actually select one of your activities, and you can export the data for it. You can export it as a BPMN diagram. You can actually get automation, which means I'm going to actually send this to Certify to create an automated process. I'll get the documentation, and then the collection itself. So what collections are is collections are how we actually organize our data. So if you think about in an organization, you may have multiple initiatives happening at the same time. So some people are working on features and stories in Agile. Some people may be working on a RISIF to add overtime page to the HR systems, or they're adding a new country to their sales order processes and that. So think of it as I've got different deliverables, and what I want to do is I want to group my different captures into that area. So we call these a collection. So ideally, what's going to happen is I've come over here into as a user. It defaults to the last 30 minutes so I can see. My documentation was already ready. So I have this set to auto-document my processes. So if I come to my documentation, what I'll see is it'll download. I have mine set for PDF. It'll also do Word. But what I can see here is the documentation of my process. So we get the description, the activity flow. We get a BPMN diagram. Now this is designated as user activity, so it's got the human icon on them. And I can actually see the screen, and then I can actually see the objects they've interacted with. I go to the next one. They went to the helper screen, click execute, and then we went to the sales order screen, and then this screen had all the specific details themselves of the data itself. So what's happening is we create with a simple narrative. I input 1710 into the sales order edit box. I have a screenshot of it, and if I scroll down, this shows me every step along the way, so nothing skipped, which is usually the hard part of human doing this. They have bias, and they don't always document every step along the way. But I can see here, I have a narrative that I did verify of the actual sell step here, and then before that, I put a comment. So I put a comment in here. It said, create the order for the bike, keep the bike order number for the delivery. This should be an example of an inbound item. So basically, your comments here will help someone understand what the process is, the context. So it's nice to have a really high fidelity thing here with all these screenshots. So if you think about it, if I had to do a training manual to show someone how to accomplish a task, or I needed a training class, and I needed screenshots for everything, this PDF has all that information. You can also generate it into a Word document and edit them. Okay? So if I come back to my capture right here, I can actually go add this to a collection. So this is similar to other things. So I've actually got bike orders collection, so I'm going to add it into there. So I can say this belongs to another body of work. If I drill in, I can actually get details. I can see the steps. I can see the input actions on the data. So I have a nice table view of everything they entered and worked with the system itself. Okay? So ideally, you can actually get, I can click clear and see, thousands of orders here and different things and success factors and that. But in reality, what I'm interested in is actually things around the bike orders. So if I look, I've got these bike orders here, and I've got different bike orders here. If I click bike orders, I add it to this collection. So you can see here's my Happy Path bike order. If I go to the Harmony view, I can see, okay, this shows doing a standard order in Fiori and doing a delivery in the SAP GUI. So these bike orders seem to be very similar in nature. Okay. If I go back to my actual collection, I look here, the sales bike orders. This is one that someone else has been working on, and we'll see what they look like. So we can see here, there's actually a lot more variation. So it looks like this project, they were documenting some current state and some to-be state things, right? So I can see here, I've got sales orders from the Fiori perspective, and then the delivery. But I also see here a VA01 and VL01 in. So I can see I've got sales orders inside of my SAP GUI. So what this does is I've got 21 captures out of my total that represented this workflow. So this is the most common workflow people have. And if I click into this, I'll actually see the details of, okay, they entered data, this is a screenshot, and 21 people, so every person entered this data. So it tells me this is actually not, optional data, this is actually kind of real data itself. Okay? If I go to the next one, I can actually see, okay, so one person entered data here, so I can actually see the context of everything. So I have actually a really good understanding of what the processes are. Okay? So ideally, the users are going to span from going from maybe looking at my own processes, maybe business is very interested in their own processes, and they're interested in variations of their own processes. Or sometimes it's something IT is very interested because they're going to do a lot of look at the common workflows, what are my high-use workflows, and then if I need to actually go through and do some, say, collaboration or upgrading of my systems, that's very interesting to me to understand how these work. So the idea is I can actually go through and I can see these. I can see the most common. This is definitely, BPMN style because it's left to right. We see the activities themselves. And on the left, we have filters, so we can, and I'll show you those in real time, how we can change what we see. If you click a square, we'll actually drill into and show you the details of the objects, and we'll give you the object references, so you understand how many people interacted with this field of the 21. So this will kind of help you understand what are required fields versus optional fields, and realize we're actually capturing a lot of interesting data. Okay? So I'm going to come over here, and let's drill into some of these and look at this. So I clicked into these here. If I go into a SAP GUI one, I can see here are my SAP screens, and these are the windows that I've entered data into it. So if I want to understand, the details about a process, I can actually find a lot of information by drilling in. But this may not be the most interesting way to do this, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the input steps and the display step count. So what this does is tells me how many of the things that I captured were input steps. So if you think back when I started, I did a capture, I put a verify, and I also put a comment step in there. So basically, I'm going to ignore those, and I'm going to say, the create sales order had 4 input fields, and everybody entered them. On this order here, they did 5 to 7 input fields. Now, obviously, this order here looks a little bit different because they only did 2 to 6. So what I can do is if I look at this, I can see, well, how large or how many fields that people interact with in these different workflows themselves, right? This VLO1N had 3 to 5 screens. Oops. And then, so we can see there were some actually optional fields here. So there's 3 of them that were the most common, and there are some optional fields, right? So where this one here, with this VLO1N with the 3, everybody entered the same fields, right? So what this says is it tells you how much data are people interacting with, which is actually really helpful to know when you do automation. If you're doing test automation, it's great to know. If you're doing RPA, robotic process automation, it's really good to know how much data is associated with an activity. Now, if I change this to say all steps, what this will do is it'll actually include any navigation steps and clicking. So if I'm having to navigate through folder tabs to enter data, or I'm navigating scrolling tables or things like that, this will be all the steps themselves. So you can see here we had 7 to 10, here we had 5 to 10. So there was actually quite a bit of a navigation inside this also. So when it comes to automating a process, maybe sometimes you want to go look at the ones that have the most steps to see why were people challenged. You know, are they clicking back and forth because they can't find something on the screen and they're just randomly clicking until they find it? Other times is that, well, there's just too much navigation to get to the data itself. So when we show you the Harmony view, the point is we want to show you how similar your processes are. We want to show you what the workflows look like, and then give you, quantifiably what's the most common things. If we scroll to the bottom, some of these, there's only one-offs here, so these weren't very common, how these happen. So we want to look at the most common ones, right? So the idea is, let me figure out how harmonious, what they are, and then find interesting things about them, how much data and how much navigation is required for them. Okay? So if you want to just stick to the simple, you can go here. So this data is very similar to what we see in the repeated pass by activity. So the repeated pass by activity, if we sort this, we've always had this concept of the activity flow. These are the blue boxes we captured. These turn into the activities in the BPMN diagram. Okay? And then I can actually click into one and actually find these are the actual captures that were done to do this. So I can see who did this, the date and the time. I can actually create documentation and extract data from all these themselves. If I go to the activities, what this shows me is what the activities are and then how many of the fields were interacted with. So, this order number was entered once, shipping point once, but these fields were entered more often. So this shows me by activity, sales order, order overview, and BLONN delivery, how common the data elements were. So we find most people are very interested in grouping their business processes by the activities. And the activities are automatically calculated for you, so you don't have to worry about that. Capture knows how to look at T-codes and knows how to look at Salesforce, success factors, Ariba, Concur, and group these activities for you. The last thing here is actually by steps. And steps is really interesting because steps is actually very much a rote, data-driven process. I can see here that 6 people did the exact same steps here. I had 5 people do the exact same steps here. So if I actually drill into this, what I'll see in the step level is that these are the actual steps that happened in the process. So they entered their username, the password. This is the data they entered. And what I can see here in the unique values is the customer reference and sold to party, shipped to party, everybody entered the same one, but the reference date, the selection date, this order number here was actually different. So if we want to understand, are the processes exactly the same down to the data level, we can actually see that by repeated pass by steps. And then what we do is we tell you how varied or unique the data is. Are people actually entering the same data, or are they entering variations of data? Which helps you kind of understand how would I do automation here? How complex or non-complex are these things? Okay. So the one thing that a lot of people like to do is they want to understand these processes. So the spike order, I can actually go through and I can export that as a BPMN diagram. And what this will do is it will give me that diagram that I saw in the Harmony view. I can also do this from the Harmony view. We have the export BPMN here. So what a BPMN does is business process modeling language allows me to describe a business process in a very reusable way. And sometimes you want to go through and you want to work with those things. So, oops, that's an IP timeout. So let's come back to solution documentation. And I'll click, I've got a specific diagram here. And so one thing that people have challenges with is getting these diagrams, these processes into other systems itself. So here, I kind of drew these by hand, not very helpful. If I do an import, what I can do is I can actually go import this BPMN process. So if I come to my downloads, and here's the one I just downloaded, and say open, what happens is we export this, and now the business process actually can be drawn for me in Solution Manager. So one thing about Solution Manager is I can actually describe, is this a new role? Nope, this is an existing role. So I actually want to go pull, oops. Well, it's not being very helpful with these drop-downs in Solution Manager, but we'll make it happen. There's an order intake role. Now I can actually map these to new references, or I can point to existing ones in SAP. So if I say this is actually an existing library, it's the home process, so I can prevent duplicates. So Solution Manager lets me import things, or I can reference existing processes. So this basically is ultra helpful when you're creating these processes. I can actually reference versus having to create them all by hand, which no one wants to do that. That's, oops, create sales. Here we go. So I can actually go through and document any of these as I want. I've already got an existing T code here. BLN in. Grab that one. So when I do import, what happens is SAP can read the BPMN and actually creates the diagram for my solution documentation. So now I have, with little to no work, I actually have my documentation inside of SAP. So I actually have my start event, my home, my helper programs, and so now I can start doing all the things I want to do in Solution Manager to document my processes. So the first time you import it, if you don't have your common processes described, you can say create new. The second time you can reference them, so you start building a library of multiple actors are working on a BLN, multiple actors are working on a create sales document, things like that. So we find that a big challenge people have is getting this type of documentation and then sharing it across systems. So if you think about that, if I did this through the old-fashioned way of screenshots with Snagit and Word documents, I would have to come over here and actually redo all that work. Okay, the fact that we automatically capture these things, we give you your process documents, right? I then can export them as BPMN and share them across processes. I have those PDFs and Word documents with the high fidelity of interactions with the screens and the windows. This is actually a big win for people. This saves a ton of time. So when we had our initial poll, most people were not documenting their processes, or they didn't trust the process documentation. Well, if it's as simple as start recording, walk through your UIs, and we automatically capture, and we give you all this great information, I think those numbers would change. More and more people will actually have up-to-date and current documentation, and it saves hours. I mean, we have customers who said they documented like 18 T codes, and it took 8 weeks. They brought in capture. They then, in 2 weeks, were able to document 100 T codes, right? But it's so much faster to do this, right? The screenshots and all that is done for them automatically. Okay? Now, the other thing that's most interesting to QA people is how do we actually get data? So a lot of people say, hey, I like these screens, I understand this, but I want to understand what my data actually looks like. From the UI, you can tell me how consistent or how many optional fields are written, but if I get my business people to walk through this, or maybe I get my, I need to build a good documentation library of my manual tests, and I want BPMN diagrams for those also. So if I walk through those, I can get the PDFs and such, but what about all the data they entered? So what we can do is we can actually extract the data and write it into an Excel format for you. And obviously Excel directly imports into Certify. Now, one special thing here, you'll notice the carets, or the shift 6, those are skipped carets within Certify. So we know when you build an automated process or automated test, we will automatically skip that data for you. And so we'll give you really rich data, but we won't make you edit it heavily within your Certify environment. So if I do export data, and I click download, what we'll see is an Excel file is generated, and I've got 3 folder tabs. So over here, I had 3 activities across the system. So what we've done is we've split the data by folder tab for you. Okay, so I can see the OR 1710-1000. This was on the create order. If I look at the order overview, here's some optional fields that were entered. If I come to the delivery, I can see there's other optional fields. So it's kind of interesting to understand, okay, so how many times was data entered? You know, here's the data. So this could be directly used in an automated process. Now, if I'm interested in this one because both of these 2 fields were entered, and I want to see that process, I just click, and we'll open a link inside your browser to bring you right to that process. So here's the process itself. This is the data they entered, so the actual details. If I want documentation on this, I can say create documentation. I'll add a Word document. If I want automation, I'll create automation from here. So I want this to be my automated test case. So what we'll see here is the document has been enqueued, my automation has been created. So if I come over here to my C for certify, I can see here's the automated test case that I've created. And so I can now go to certify and download it. I've got a notification my documentation is ready. So if I come here, I generated a Word document this time. So in this case, Word will open, and now I have the same information, but I've got it in a Word document. So I can maybe edit this or cut and paste and take things out of it. So here's the screens and all the information itself. Okay? So the idea is we really want to make it very easy for you to collaborate and share information across your life cycle. So we feel part of it is not only in providing what the process is, we want to make sure this process can be integrated and work across multiple systems themselves. We want to understand how consistent or common these processes are, what they look like. We want to create your BPMN diagrams. You can share this with other systems like Solution Manager. We want to be able to get data out of these, use them for automated tests. And then remember, we want to look at like what's the differences between your input steps, where you're entering data, and your navigation steps. Because in many cases, people are having challenges in their robotic process automation because when they say, hey, we want to RPA this process, they go to a whiteboard and they manually document this. So how do they know if this is a heavy use process? Well, if we have people capturing, we can see how many people captured it. We can see the differences between how much data was entered versus how much navigation was done on the steps. And things that have heavy navigation means that, you know, we could probably optimize that by automating it and having, say, Certify act as a robot and do that data inside of there. So hopefully this has been helpful, and we can explain to you what you can do to actually automate your processes and how you can share that automation across your life cycle.